scientists were studying what happens when you take cells from the arteries and put them under stress. And what they found in test tubes is very high levels of inflammation and free radicals, which is what they expect. But then they did the experiment again. This time, they put a couple of drops of oxytocin in there. The same oxytocin that you produce by being kind. And amazingly, the levels of inflammation and free radicals dropped quite substantially, comparatively to heart drugs that I remember working on when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. So it was about a 30 to 50% reduction very quickly in inflammation and free radicals inside our arteries. Now, if you could get a pharmaceutical drug to do that, you'd be pretty happy with it. Certainly my time in the industry, those kind of stats you'd be fairly happy with. But get this, you're producing those kind of stats by being kind. And it explains a study that no one could explain, no one fully understood up until recently. Anyone heard of the Roseto Effect? So Rosetto is a town on the eastern coast of the United States. In the 1960s, there was a census, a national census. And one of the weird stats that came out of the census in the United States is that not one single person under the age of 55 in the entire history of the town of Rosetto had ever died of a heart attack. Not a single person. The whole, as far back as medical records went, not a single person under 55 had ever died of a heart attack in Rosetto. Now, given the fact that America is the heart disease capital of the world, closely followed by Scotland, there you go. One of my sisters posted on her Facebook page last week a deep fried Mars bar. That's one of her, and apparently it's really nice. You don't actually get it. Contrary to, let me qualify this. You don't get it wrapped up in newspaper like a fish supper. You actually get it with a knife and fork. It's a sweet, and it's just fried. It's just fried in normal fish batter stuff, but it's just, you get it as, anyway. I've never tried it myself. But I would guess it's one of the reasons why Scotland is number 2 on the heart disease list of catching up in America. I'm going to get them. But anyway, so given the fact that America is this heart disease capital of the world, how weird is it that no one under 55 ever in Rosetto at that point had ever died of a heart attack? And in fact, in the over 65s, it was way below the national average. And scientists thought, isn't that weird? Couldn't figure it out. So the scientists descended on the town. Check, what is it about Rosetto? Why is no one in Rosetto really dying of heart disease? Why is it happening? They were taking samples of the water. They were looking at the climate, trying to figure it out. They couldn't figure it out. Eventually, they came to a conclusion, which turned out to be the wrong conclusion. They said, Rosetto is mostly Italian immigrants. They've brought the Mediterranean lifestyle and diet. That's what it is. They've brought the Mediterranean diet. That's why. No one thought to actually ask them what they eat. And until these scientists called epidemiologists. An epidemiologist is people who study statistics of population trends. And the epidemiologist pointed out, and here's a really good after-dinner conversation or during-dinner conversation to have with your friends. They pointed out that the sale of laxatives in Rosetto was identical to the sale of laxatives in other towns of the same size. Now, why am I talking about laxatives here? Well, see, epidemiologists, population trends and stuff, they don't have time to interview people. So what you do is you look for things that indicate diet. So there is a mathematical relationship, very reliable, it turns out, that between the size of a population and the sale of laxatives. And what that does is it tells you, on average, what the average diet is in a town. Of course, you've always got people at one end really healthy and people at the other end not so healthy. And a bell, it's called the bell curve, and everyone in 80% of the people kind of fit within a typical type of diet. So there's a very reliable relationship between the size of a population and the sale of laxatives. So epidemiologists quoted that the sale of laxatives was exactly the same as other towns in the United States of comparable size. So it was nothing to do with diet, and it turned out they had been fully westernised. It was a McDonald's in the high street, so it was nothing to do with diet. Eventually, they figured out what had actually predicted the residents of Rosetto, despite their diets. from heart disease was each other. They had a very high degree of what's called social connectedness. What that basically means is everyone knows everyone else. And in the UK, I think the average number of people per household is like, I think it's just less than 2, or it's just more, it's 1.8 or it's 2.2, something that's round about 2. In Rosetto, it was 3 times that. So the average household had 3 or 4 generations of family living together. So the kids, parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, all sharing meals together, all interacting with each other. Not sitting on their phones, looking at the news, checking Facebook, but actually sitting, interacting with each other. And what that does, and helping each other out, and what that does is it produces copious quantities of oxytocin. I call the phenomenon kindnection. That's my definition of it, kindnection. It's when people have connections that are characterised by lots of helping, lots of kindness, kindnection. Wherever there is kindnection, there is oxytocin. And it turns out in Rosetto, they had a very high degree of kindnection. And that is what protected them from heart disease. And that is why not a single person under the age of 55, as far as medical records went back, in Rosetto had ever died of a heart attack.